Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the installment of Scott Selections here for Monday, December 28th. Before we get into today's play, a quick recap of what happened yesterday. We ended up going 1-2. Very solid day in college basketball as we ended up winning again. We had Drake minus 3.5 at plus 100 on Fox Bet. Still don't really get the line there. They ended up winning by double digits. This Drake team continues to be a cover machine. And Indiana State had no answers in the second half. So a very easy win. I believe they won by 18. So they continue to be our cash cow, and we'll be riding them in the future. I did not decide to give them out today, though, because I am a little bit concerned about the immediate rematch angle for Indiana State. What I noticed in college basketball is that since you have some travel issues with COVID and how they're trying to make it easier for most of these games to get played, you have a decent amount of back-to-back immediate rematch situations where these two teams are playing each other in consecutive days. And I feel like that's kind of creating some really interesting spreads, if you want to talk about it, because some teams lose by 17 yesterday, and they're still favored. And I just feel like I'm going to wait it out and kind of see if there's any trends or something I could pick up on in these immediate rematch games. I'm not really interested, so I'm going to skip the college basketball card. Really not many great games if you really go down the list. So sorry if you're expecting college basketball, but I'm not going to be providing any plays today. We'll be back tomorrow with college basketball, so stay tuned for that. But for the NBA, I know that it didn't work out well yesterday. We went 0-2. We had the Nets and we had the Bucks. We beat pretty big line moves on both. We had the Nets minus 8. I believe they closed at 10.5. And we had the Bucks minus 11.5, and they closed at around 12.5 or 13. And both of them ended up losing outright. So a pretty interesting day in the association yesterday. But at the end of the day, it's still very early in the season. I'm not going to overreact to it. We beat two pretty big line moves. And we had, significantly better teams in comparison to the opposition. But both those teams was a complete no-show. I don't know what the story was after the Christmas games, but the Nets and the Bucks just simply didn't really show up for, I'd say, all four quarters or so. The Nets I'll give a little bit more credit to because they actually hung tough. They weren't getting blown out. I don't know what the Bucks were doing yesterday. The Bucks ended up going into MSG following the Knicks getting blown out by 20-plus to the Sixers the day prior, and the Bucks were off a 40-point win against the Warriors and yeah, the Bucks just didn't show up. They got absolutely smacked in the first half, got smacked in the second half, and got killed. So anyway, I'm not going to really overreact to it. This kind of stuff happens occasionally in the NBA, but we beat some good line moves, and for that reason, I can't really complain about the handicapping process that we went through for those games. But anyway, looking at the NBA card, I'll be giving out a play of the day, and I will be going through leans on the rest of the card. Pretty short card on the NBA. You only have 5 games. You also have some questionable injury reports for some of these games, so I'll go through those briefly, but discuss some caveats that you might want to keep in mind. But anyway, the play of the day for the NBA here on Monday, December 28th is going to be on the Hawks, and as they take on the Pistons in a home game for the Hawks. And the best line available right now is the Hawks minus 9.5, which is available on a bet online at minus 115. The time recording of 11:36 a.m. Eastern time. A couple reasons why I like the Hawks in this matchup. First of all, I don't think it's a secret that the Pistons are an awful basketball team. I said going into the season that they would probably finish the year with a bottom 3 record in the league. And so far this season, they're definitely on pace as they are 0-2. They ended up losing to Minnesota by 10 in the opener on the road. That game, they were actually winning for about 3 quarters before falling apart in the fourth quarter. And then they ended up losing their last game to the Cavaliers by 9 in double overtime. The game was a thrilling game, but at the end of the day, the Pistons ended up coming from behind just to lose in pretty painful fashion in double overtime there. But looking at the Hawks, they've been the opposite. They have looked really sharp so far this season as they are 2-0. And they're beating the Bulls in the opener by 20, which I don't really know if that means anything because the Bulls are actually terrible. And then they're beating the Grizzlies by 10 on the road, which is impressive. But that also means that Atlanta has not played a home game. This will be the first home game for Atlanta. So I do think that the Hawks should be pretty motivated for this game, and I think they will come out with a bit of a spark. But the Pistons, we've already talked about how bad they are and how I thought they were basically tanking. Looking through the actual lineup that they have, definitely a very underwhelming lineup if you actually want to go through it from top to bottom in terms of personnel. The leading scorer on this team is Blake Griffin, who's averaging 20.5 points per game. Jeremy Grant's averaging 18.5 with a big game against the Cavaliers. You have Derrick Rose, who is third in scoring with 14 points per game. You have Josh Jackson, who was of course, Kansas top draft pick who ended up becoming a reject because of some off-the-court issues. But he's pretty sharp as he's averaging 12.5 points per game. You have DeLon Wright at point guard as the starting point guard is averaging 12 points per game. And Mason Plumlee, who's averaging 10 points per game. So just to go through the names again, Griffin, Grant, Rose, Jackson, Wright, Plumlee. And those are your top 6 leading scorers. Not good. Not a very, very good lineup there. And the reason why I bring this up, I know you might think that 10 is a bit high for the spread. It originally opened up at 7. Now it's up to 10. So if you're wondering why the spread is so high, it's because of the fact that even though the Pistons are the significantly inferior team, their lineup got even worse today because they already announced that there are a couple of guys who are going to be sitting for this game following the double overtime game. Specifically, leading scorer Blake Griffin has been ruled out for this game due to rest, and they've already ruled Derrick Rose out as well due to rest, which means that the projected starting lineup for the Pistons is going to be Killian Hayes, the rookie, DeLon Wright, Jeremy Grant, Doumbouya potentially, and Mason Plumlee. This lineup just isn't very good, just to put it mildly. At the end of the day, Detroit is already offensively challenged, as if you look at them in this matchup, they have been struggling to put the ball in the basket. They only scored about 101 against the Timberwolves in the opener. They scored 119 against the Cavaliers, but that also included some overtime periods. So if you want to talk about just regulation, they have failed to score more than 101 points in regulation all season long. Meanwhile, Atlanta's averaging over 120 points per game, and Detroit's going to be missing 2 of their top 3 scorers. It's just a really bad spot for Detroit here. And now that they've already announced the absence of 2 of their best players, I just think this game's going to turn into a blowout. I'm not going to say it's going to turn into Hawks-Bulls in the opener, where they're up 40 in the third quarter. But this Hawks team definitely looks pretty sharp, especially with all the acquisitions they made during the offseason. I know Chris Dunn hasn't played in a game yet this season, so their defense could use a little bit of work. But Gallinari's look pretty sharp. Bogdanovich has looked pretty good. And Trae Young has definitely looked like a man possessed so far this season. Plus, looking at the Pistons, Capella is a game-time decision, but he's expected to play, so I do think he'll do a pretty good job matching up with Plumlee. And I don't think Doumbouya should have much of, I'd say, a performance against John Collins, who is a very, very underrated power forward in the league. But Trae Young being guarded by Killian Hayes and DeLon Wright, that's a problem. I think the Hawks should win this game comfortably, probably win by double digits. But for that reason, I think there is some value here at 9.5 and -115 on BetOnline. That will be the play of the day. But looking at the rest of the NBA card, we'll go in order chronologically. You have the Memphis Grizzlies and the Brooklyn Nets taking on each other, as the Nets are currently 6.5-point favorites. Total has been bet up from 232 to 233.5. Now, the Nets did have some news so far today. After losing to the Hornets yesterday, it got even worse for the Nets as they officially announced that Spencer Dinwiddie, who has been a solid contributor for this team for several years, has a partial tear in his ACL, so he'll be out indefinitely, and he'll probably return in a month or so. But he will be able to return later on this season, but he will be out for the foreseeable future because of the knee injury. Does that make a big impact on the team? Probably not, because they still have Durant and Kyrie. But at the end of the day, you still have LeVert coming off the bench. I'm curious if that will cause LeVert to enter the starting lineup now, or if they're going to keep LeVert on the bench to provide a bit of a sixth-man spark. We'll see how that works with the rotations. Might mean more minutes for Landry Shamet, which pains me because I am such a Landry Shamet hater. Not because of anything that he did personally. I just think he's an awful basketball player, and I'm still bothered the Nets gave up a first-round pick for him because I think that he is just really bad. But anyway, Memphis has struggled so far this season. They are 0-2. They lost to the Spurs in the opener. They lost to the Hawks in the second game. At the end of the day, the Grizzlies' main issue is defense. They're giving up 126.5 points per game. This team just can't get any stops. And Morant has been very solid so far this season in terms of scoring. Nobody else has really stepped up, and that is definitely concerning moving forward. Grizzlies are still doing well offensively, but this team has got to start guarding people because they're not going to win many games when they're giving up at least 122 points in every game. Morant's averaging 36 points per game. Brooks is averaging 17.5. Valanciunas is averaging 14. Kyle Anderson has actually been very good this season, averaging 13.5 and 11.5 rebounds. So overall, they've been very solid so far this season. Jaren Jackson being out has definitely hurt this team, especially defensively, because he is known as being a very solid defender. But at the end of the day, he is not going to be playing in this game either. So Memphis is going to have to try to piece something together defensively, and I'm not sure if they'll be able to do so. But looking at the Nets, I'm not going to overreact to the game yesterday. They simply came out flat, but they almost fought back and won. Durant had a look to tie the game, potentially send it to overtime, and he missed. But looking at this matchup here, I'm going to lean to the Nets. I know that the Grizzlies just had a day off, and the Nets had to play. But at the end of the day, this Grizzlies defense leaves a lot to be desired. And against the likes of Kyrie and Durant, I think it could get ugly. I do expect Morant to have a pretty big game because he's kind of required to if Memphis plans on remaining competitive. But I can't back this Memphis defense. We'll see what happens when Jackson comes back because he might provide a little bit more resistance in the paint. But if you're not getting stops on one end and now you have to face off against one of the best tandems in the entire league. I think that's a recipe for disaster. So for me, I'll lean to the Nets, and for the sake of the total, I'll lean to the over. I know that the Nets have played good defense, but Memphis has a solid offense, and this defense is terrible. The Nets could score 120 or even more in this game, and it really wouldn't surprise me. So I'll lean to the Nets and the over in that one. Other than that, though, looking at Utah and Oklahoma City, Utah's been bet up from 7 to 8.5. Totals dropped from 221.5 to 218. Oklahoma City with an impressive win in the opener as they ended up beating the Hornets via a game-winning jump shot by Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who is probably going to win Most Improved Player if you can find odds for that because they have nobody else on the roster. Alexander should probably average around 28 and 6. So he'll put up some good numbers, but we'll see what happens moving forward. Utah, on the other hand, has been, I'd say, a little bit inconsistent so far this season as they ended up losing to Minnesota in their last game after smacking Portland in the opener. So Utah has had some issues with consistency over the past couple of years, and this season looks kind of similar. But they go up against an Oklahoma City team that is supposed to be one of the worst teams in the league. I'm not going to overreact to a win over Charlotte. It was definitely an impressive win they held on for on the road, but Utah's a much better team. Having said all that, I'm not going to take a side because I am a little bit squeamish when it comes to laying big numbers with the Jazz, as this team sometimes comes out extremely flat. So for me, I'm going to lean to the under here. I think you'll see an issue with scoring. You saw the Thunder score 109 against Charlotte. You saw Utah only score 111 against Minnesota. But Utah also only up 100 to Portland. So both teams have the capability of playing good defense. Oklahoma City also doesn't play at a particularly fast pace. They play primarily in the half court, and I do think that Utah will gladly agree to partake in that. So I think that you'll see mostly a half-court game where transition points will exist but be a little bit few and far between, which should lead to fewer points. The reason why this total has already dropped from 221.5 to 218.5. And for that reason, I think this game will be a little bit more low-scoring. I think this game will be a little bit uglier. And for that reason, I will take the under in this spot. Now, looking at Houston and Denver at 9 o'clock, Denver's currently laying 6.5. It has been bet down from 7.5 to 6.5. Total has been bet down from 225 to 222.5. I'm going to take Houston plus the points here. I know Houston is still missing a decent amount of players, including John Wall and Boogie Cousins. But Houston actually impressed me in their last game. I know that we gave out Portland. They ended up not covering. They won the game outright, but did not cover the 7.5. Houston hung tough, and you could make an argument they probably should have won the game. Harden was great. He had 40-plus points and double-digit assists. So if you were wondering if he'd come out rusty, maybe disinterested like I thought, definitely was not the case because Harden absolutely went off. And Denver so far this season has looked very underwhelming. I'm not exactly sure how valuable Jeremy Grant was to that team, but defensively, he definitely provided a ton of value because Denver has been getting torched defensively, giving up 122.5 points per game. Now, is Houston's defense much better? No. But at the end of the day, I do think that it's a little bit too many points for Denver to be laying. This team lost to Sacramento just by laying a decent number. They lost to the Clippers by double digits. I just think that this Nuggets team is a bit overvalued because of what we saw last year. This team made the Western Conference Finals, and people think that this team is going to find a way to get back there as they kept most of the core. But defensively, they're just a disaster. I mean, if you want to go through the actual roster here, where is their defensive stopper? You want to look at Jamal Murray, who I think is an okay defender. I don't exactly think he's a great defender by any means. You have Gary Harris, who is okay. I'd say he's a little bit of a plus defender. You have Michael Porter Jr., who's a disaster defensively. I know he might have gotten a little bit better, but his rookie year and onward, he has looked a little bit lost defensively throughout his career. You have Paul Millsap, who at this stage in his career doesn't exactly have much of a vertical. I don't think he's really much of a defensive stopper. And Jokic, who I guess can provide a little bit of rim protection, but definitely with his lack of verticality doesn't provide much. So you go through that entire starting lineup, really not many great defensive options. So out of all the people I just mentioned, with Porter, with Murray, with Harris, even Barton off the bench, who's going to guard Harden? Like, they don't really have one of those guys who I really have faith in these one-on-one matchups with Harden. I don't have faith in really anybody with a one-on-one matchup with Harden, but the Nuggets especially. So for me, I'll take the points with Houston. I think it's a little bit too big of a spread. I think this should be around maybe 4.5 or 5.5. But for that reason, I'll take Houston plus the point to 6.5. And the last game, you have the Lakers and the Trailblazers. The Lakers won yesterday against Minnesota. However, even though it is a back-to-back, they were up by 30 pretty much the entire game, coasted to a win, and they were able to rest some key contributors because of the blowout margin. But it is worth mentioning that Anthony Davis did not play in yesterday's game with a calf contusion, so they're not sure if he's going to play in this game. They're also not sure if LeBron's going to play in this game because there are some rumors that in back-to-back games, The Lakers will simply rotate superstars. So AD will play one game, LeBron will play the next game, and they'll work it out. But since AD did not play the first game, they're not sure if he's going to play the second game. LeBron could take the day off. So we'll see what happens there. The spread has been bet up a little bit from Lakers -3 to -3.5. The question is, do you want to gamble? Because you have to wonder if LeBron or AD are by themselves out there, do you want to lay 3.5? And I feel like the answer for LeBron is yes. For AD, maybe not, because AD might be on a minutes restriction there if his calf injury is playable, but definitely they don't want to push it because it's that early in the season. So for me, for the sake of this, I'm going to assume LeBron's going to play. I think if LeBron had to play a full 30-something plus minutes yesterday, he would not. But since he was able to take the fourth quarter off, I do think that he will be playing in this game. As for Anthony Davis, I'm not sure. I'll assume no for the sake of this video. But looking at this matchup here, I'm still going to lean with the Lakers here at -3.5. I thought about giving it out, but with all the injury question marks, I decided not to. Portland might have beaten Houston in their last game. I am not impressed. This team defensively is awful. They brought in Covington. They brought in Derrick Jones Jr. to try to help out. But this team defensively has been a mess. Nurkic has also struggled a bit so far this season, and I simply just don't have faith in Portland right now. They have to show me something moving forward. I know Melo's going to be out for this game, so they might lose a little bit of scoring punch, but defensively they might be a little bit better. But we'll see what happens there. I'm going to lean to the Lakers. They won each of their last two games by at least 20 points. This Lakers team seems dialed in. Montrez providing some very, very solid minutes off the bench. Schroeder's been very solid as well. LeBron and AD have looked comfortable, but I'll assume AD's not going to play in this matchup. Kuzma looked sharp yesterday. Even Caldwell Pope has looked decent so far this season. So at the end of the day, I think Portland has some talent, but defensively, this team gets a no stop. So I think that's going to be a problem. I'll lean to the Lakers in that one. So other than that, though, the play that I once again here for the NBA on Monday, December 28th is going to be on the Hawks -9.5, which is available on Bet Online at -115. That's been Salma Scott Selections. Good luck to all of you and your respective best today. Bye, everyone.